So it has happened. The AfD has won a district administrator position for the first time in Germany. Robert Sesselmann of the AfD won the election with 52.8% against the CDU candidate Jürgen Koppe with 47.2%. I want to start out by saying welcome to the channel for those of you who are new, and by saying that I am an American who is currently serving as an intern in the German Bundestag, and this is a channel that will be covering German politics from an American perspective and for an American or English-speaking audience. I did a video earlier this week about this election that was happening, so I want to go first have a recap over the election and look at some of the results we have now. So this was an election for a district administrator, that is the head executive of basically a county. So this is not a mayor of a single city, but a mayor of a group of small cities and towns. And it took place in the East German state of Thuringia. Now, this is a very small district, but what was important about this is it was highly suspected that the AfD could actually win here. And the AfD is Germany's right-wing populist party. It is a very controversial party and has not been able to work with or form any relations with the other parties. And because of that, they've had a very hard time winning these direct elections, because once they make it to the second round, all other parties work together against them. And this happened here, but as we see, it did not work, and the AfD managed to break through. Now, in my previous video, we did a look at a comparison to another election, and I made a prediction that the AfD would end up winning with about 50.5%. The AfD candidate did win with a bit slightly higher of a margin than I was expecting. And one of the reasons for this was I expected the AfD, like a lot of people, had done so well in the first round, likely due to the low turnout. There wasn't that high of a turnout in the first round, and not a lot of people were expecting the AfD to do as well as they did. And I had expected that the AfD had done so well because not that many people had voted, and in the second round, a lot of people would see how strong the AfD was. They would get out and vote against the party. And there was undoubtedly very high turnout in the second round as compared to the first round. However, it did not appear to help the CDU that much. Not only were there a lot of people that went out and voted for the CDU to block the AfD, there were a lot of people that didn't vote for the AfD in the first round, didn't vote in the first round at all, that went and voted for them in the second round. So we see the mobilization of the politicians from the other parties on the federal level has appeared to somewhat have backfired. Now, this result, of course, was still close. It's in with around 5-6 points, so not a total landslide either way. But nonetheless, this is a clear result. The AfD has won their first runoff election for a municipal level. I think with this result, it's clearly shown that they can do it again. Now, if we look at some of the reactions of the politicians, Jürgen Kopfer, the CDU, came out and said, of course, he was disappointed by the result, but he blamed the federal government. He said that the current traffic light coalition in Berlin has been responsible for a lot of bad policies, and that has pushed voters to vote this way in protest against all of the establishment parties. So, of course, he is shifting the blame. The governor of the state, Bodo Ramelow from the Left Party, also blaming the establishment. He actually said, took a different approach, and he said that the West, the political establishment in the West, had ignored the problems of East Germany for a long time. After reunification, there have been a lot of problems with the economy, with integration, and that has long been ignored, and he said that this is a signal to those politicians. It is their time. It is finally time for them to address this issue. Now, why is this election so important? Now, we talked about this in the previous video. This is not a huge area. This is a small district, but it sets a precedent. And not only if the AfD can win here, it shows that they can win in the future, but also it means that they actually have legitimate power. And so all the parties of the establishment were coalescing together, saying that the AfD is too extreme. The AfD does not need to be in power. We want to prevent them from doing that. A lot of the politicians use the term, calling all the Democratic parties to form a united front, or what is called in France the Republican Front, a cordon sanitaire, a Brandmauer, a firewall as it's called in Germany sometimes, against the AfD. And that has broken for the first time. And this shows that the AfD has somewhat become legitimate because they have established power for the first time. And I want to take a look. This is the actual Kreistag for Sonneberg. This is effectively the city council. And this is another important dynamic to look at. It is very easy for political parties to ignore the AfD or to isolate the AfD when they are, for example, the second largest party on a city council. You can do that to a point. However, now that they control the executive position in this county, they have a lot more influence and power. And not only that, there's an important aspect we need to talk about here, and is that all parties have completely refused to allow any relations. And that doesn't just mean that the CDU, the left, the SPD do not work with the AfD. That means any politicians in those parties that go out of their way to contact the AfD, that have any relations, are punished from the federal party. However, in a county like this where you have the head executive from the AfD, that is going to be very hard because you're demanding the majority of the city council to not effectively talk or have any kind of cooperation or relationship with the head executive, and that is going to create problems. Now, of course, this is a small area, and what's important is this allows kind of a precedent, a breakthrough, because just because it's a small area and doesn't have much industry or population doesn't mean it's not going to be governable. It has to be governed, it has to be administrative, and if talks here happen between the establishment parties and the AfD, that sets a precedent that can then spread to other areas. Politicians at the state level can say, okay, we can have a relationship between the CDU and the AfD in Sonneberg, so why not in the whole state of Thuringia? Now, for the AfD, of course, this is a very good thing because this builds their power, their legitimacy, their normalization, speaking of the normalization process for them. But for the establishment parties, this is going to be a nightmare for them to navigate and try to figure out how to completely stop the AfD. Now, there are other implications for this, and that is the Thuringian state election. This state of Thuringia has its state election in about a year. It'll happen in the fall of 2024, and we can see clearly the AfD is in the lead. They are polling at 30%. I'm going to take a look actually right here at the polling trends. We see on the left here is the results from the previous election, and we see, of course, the trends for the parties. At the beginning of COVID, the incumbent party of the governor, this purple party, that's Die Linke, was very high because, in crises and emergencies like that, usually the incumbent is polling very high. We see it kind of fell down at the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine crisis. You see a lot of the AfD begins to climb, and this is because, of course, the position that the people in the eastern states have towards the Russia-Ukraine war is a lot different than those in the West, and the East was kind of angry at how much the West was getting, or Germany as a whole was getting involved in the war with sanctions. They wanted to take a more neutral stance, and this also plays into the fact that East Germany, of course, was aligned with the Soviet Union. A lot of older East German voters still learned Russian in the schools, still speak some Russian, so they have more of a tighter relationship with Russia than, per se, the western part of the country, which is more aligned with the U.S., So definitely a reaction. The AfD now at around 30%, so they are by far the largest party. And this does not mean that they're going to come to power. However, every step like this, every new milestone the party reaches is a step closer to that. And they are now ahead of the incumbent party of Bodo Ramelow, the party of the incumbent governor, from the left. And we see this current government doesn't even have a majority. The current government is a left-wing government of Die Linke, the SPD, and the Greens, all three of the left-wing parties. And they are supported as a minority government by these elements of the CDU and FDP. That's because there's no workable majority in this state, and that means the situation is very unstable. And the stronger the AfD gets, the stronger the chances are of them coming to power. And it's not going to be so easy as that the AfD wins an election, they form a coalition like that, because the CDU has still maintained the line that they're not going to work with the AfD. However, the CDU in this state can say, okay, we're suffering losses, we're losing elections, we either work with the AfD in some way or another, maybe a minority government, or we don't work with them and we continue to lose support. So even if the CDU holds the line about not having any cooperation with the AfD, we see things start to break. And it's a very interesting situation, an interesting development, and this is a state where the environment, the political environment from this state is completely different than the national environment. So we see an important factor. Now, this election will happen for a year, but of course the election in Sonneberg has huge implications. Politicians pretty much from every party at the state level, federal level, in the mayors, the European Parliament are all giving the reactions. Of course, the AfD leadership is very happy about this result. The AfD leader in the state, Björn Höcke, has said that this is a kind of political earthquake and a signal to their success in the future, whereas the parties of the politicians, the political establishment, are kind of in shock at the result. Now, I want to clarify something. The reason I say the political establishment is because, of course, the CDU, the SPD, FDP, and Greens have all been in government, whether it be federal or state, for decades now. And although I wouldn't necessarily call Die Linke an establishment party, in this state in particular, of course, they hold the governor, which is the only state where it's the case. But because of that, I would consider them an establishment party because they are the state establishment, and the SPD, FDP would be the federal establishment. Nonetheless, a huge result, a huge shock. This election was upplayed by the media to federal importance, and it has sent a clear signal. They really tried to, play the system. They really thought that they were going to be able to create enough attention to stop the AfD here, but it appeared to have basically backfired on them. And we will have more elections like this in the future. We'll see if the AfD can repeat this result. It's still going to be hard for them because elections like this, they are still going to have all the parties going against them. But nonetheless, a milestone for them and an interesting signal to the political establishment. We will see throughout the next couple of weeks what happens. Next week, the Bundestag will be in session again. I'm sure there will be many debates in the Germany's federal parliament. There will be probably speeches heard from politicians of all parties. You will see kind of the blame go around at who's at fault for this. I suspect you will see a lot more infighting between these parties now because, they can attack the AfD to a certain point, but once the AfD starts winning like this, they're going to have to start to change the tactics they're using. And I think the CDU is definitely going to criticize the federal government for this loss. And, of course, the federal government is going to criticize the CDU candidate for not preventing this from happening. So, interesting result. I just wanted to fill you guys in on this since I made a video about the prediction. Overall, it's kind of in line. It's slightly different than what I expected, but kind of in line with the predictions. So, yes, I thank you guys all for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And please like and subscribe and share the videos if you like it with anyone interested in politics. And I will see you in the next one. I'll be making some videos. I don't know about what yet just now, but hopefully within the next couple weeks I'll have some more out. So thank you all and goodbye.